Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to welcome you on this event, which has been long awaited. We were supposed to have it in the end of February, but you know very well what events just evolved, and therefore we had to postpone the event. But nevertheless, let me start briefly with giving welcome remarks minute to our head of the board of the Eastern Europe Security Institute. And then I'll be moderating the event and presenting the Ukrainian part of it. So Mr. Anatoly Pinchuk, who is under my second name, Yulia Smilovska, but basically I'm introducing you and welcoming you, giving you the floor. Thank you.
The current situation now shows what dampers China ambition now. Example of Russia Federation shows for us that great network of influence or now friendly promotion is very, very dangerous. Economic influence and economic expansion of China in Eastern Europe and in Europe also very, very important issue. I'm grateful for Androgynia for understanding that important this issue and for support our project. And I also grateful for who now take part in this round table and who take part in realization of our project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anatoly. So let me continue then, ladies and gentlemen. And again, let me reiterate my acknowledgements of our institute, first of all, to the donor who actually supported this research project, the International Renaissance Foundation, or in Ukrainian, it's Foundation Vidrodzenia that Anatoly mentioned. And these studies are the part of the project to develop cooperation networks among European think tanks. Therefore, you will be seeing a number of our distinguished speakers and presenters of their parts of research from different parts of Europe. And we are very happy to have this connection, this network established, in particular for this project, but also hope to develop this further into different other spheres. So the speakers that are going to present their pieces today is Ambassador Jerzy Nowakowski. He's the president of the Euro-Atlantic Association of Poland, former ambassador of Poland to Armenia, Latvia, professor of University of Warsaw, together with Professor Adam Jelonek, who is the director of Middle East Institute at the Jagiellonian University, former ambassador of Poland to Malaysia, Brunei, and the Philippines. So you might see that these two distinguished gentlemen going to present the piece on Poland. But we hope to get them finally, because they're currently in such locations that the connection is very disrupted. But I hope that we'll be happy to have them on board and to present their part of research. Then we'll have Mr. Anton Duymovich, Senior Associate, Institute for Development and International Relations of Croatia. He'll be presenting the piece on Chinese activity in Western Balkans. Then Marislav Rinavicius, who will deliver us a very intriguing report on Lithuania and probably more broad view on how China is present in the Baltic states. And then we have a very good introduction also of the more geopolitical context of the China's presence in Europe, delivering the view on from US. and also more broad overview of EU-China relations and a bit of Chinese presence in the region of Central and Eastern European countries. And Darren Spink, who is a research fellow of Henry Jackson Society. So we are very welcome to have you. We're very lucky to have you on board. Thank you very much. And then it's going to be me who will be doing a piece on Ukraine, and especially, which is especially intriguing, and the context of the Russian invasion into Ukraine and the Chinese similarly ambiguity on identifying the Russian military adventurism as actually the explicit Russian invasion into Ukraine, and how this political stance of China actually impacts the general relations between China and Ukraine in all spheres at the moment. So about some technicalities of the event and the scenario. We'll be giving a sense of geopolitical context, as they mentioned, with regard to the US view on China's presence in the region, then EU-China relations and China CEE or Central and Eastern Europe relations in format 16+1. Just a broad overview, so we are not going to be very specific on that because this would require a particular event apart from this one. Because our event is rather concentrated on a sort of comparative analysis of how China is performing in different parts of Europe with regard to the tools or tactics it's used, because a number of research has been done already on this region and for particular countries, but most of them tend to come to one and the same conclusion, that the strategy that China applies is more or less the same, the instruments it uses more or less the same, but the tactics might be different, and it is differs because of the political nuances of the different countries and the Chinese approach how to tackle these political nuances of different countries. For the first hour, we'll be having the brief presentations for 10 minutes +5 for more questions, individual questions that I posed in advance to this event to our speakers. So each will have for 15 minutes for their presentation. So it's going to be altogether going to be around 1 hour, and then we'll have 30 minutes for discussions and questions and answer sessions. So I hope we'll have some from the audience. So once again, my acknowledgements and appreciation for all of you who found this time in the middle of summer holidays to devote an hour and a half to this event. And I hope that you won't be dissatisfied with what you hear, but rather intrigued what will follow. And so we'll be happy to see you again at our other events. So then let me start first with this geopolitical context, because when we discuss with our speakers and experts what angles of research we need to take with regard to each particular country. So the ambassador, His Excellency Ambassador Novakovsky suggested that we omit the geopolitical context from the research, and we should have one. Then we have to pay tribute to the political farsightedness of ambassador, because especially since February, definitely this geopolitical context plays a lot in at least as far as Chinese relations with the Central and Eastern European countries are concerned, because as you might be seen from our presentations today and following different other information in the media, that the format itself tend to show rather degrading tendency at the moment, to the extent that Chinese also pretend to blame political considerations that hamper economic cooperation of China with the countries in Central and Eastern Europe. To what extent these claims are justified, we'll be seeing, and definitely I'll be happy to give the floor to Darren, who will present the view from the US. on how the Chinese activity is being perceived there. What are the geopolitical games? Probably to dwell a bit on the EU-China relations, because I know from Darren's research that he's done a lot on that as well. And then probably it would be natural, Darren, for you just to present major findings from your piece of research. And then we will be following two particular countries in the Eastern Europe region. Thank you. Darren, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Yulia. Can you hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to present this extremely important and topical issue. I think it all boils down right now in Central and Eastern Europe, as far as Chinese influence in this region, to a great power competition between the United States and China. The great power competition is both a geopolitical and ideological conflict. It's both a balance of ideas and power. And while it is mostly prevalent, this great power competition between the US and China in the Indo-Pacific, and also, as I mentioned, of course, in Central and Eastern Europe, it has also evolved in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Arctic as well. It would not be an overstatement to say the relations between the US and China are at its lowest point in decades. This has led to a decoupling of economies between the two countries. And it's also impacted Beijing strategies in Central and Eastern Europe. Also impacting Beijing strategies in the region is China's and Russia's friendship with no limits following announced prior to the invasion of Ukraine and continuing throughout the war between Russia and Ukraine. This is likely going to cause European governments to rethink their economic cooperation with Beijing. Germany had long embraced a policy of peace or change through trade with the Chinese and with the Russians as well. But soon after Ukraine's invasion, Germany's foreign minister reminded the Chinese that it had a special responsibility as a permanent United Nations Security Council member to deter Russia's ongoing war. Of course, this has not happened, and it's certainly not beyond the realm of likelihood that the rest of Central and Eastern Europe have taken note of this and have re-questioned their relationships with Beijing ever since. China's aspirations, from my research, are essentially fourfold in as far as their policies in Central and Eastern Europe. One, it's to make the region more dependent on China economically. Two, to supplant or neutralize US technological and political influence in the region. Three, to overmatch or weaken US military strength in the region. And four, to detach US allies from Washington. Now, moving forward, there are certainly going to be four key geopolitical implications which are going to change not only how the US interacts with Central and Eastern Europe and with China, but how China interacts with Central and Eastern Europe and the United States. The four geopolitical events that are going to impact this are: one, the economic condition of the United States and China; two, the war in Ukraine; three, the growing conflict in the Taiwan Strait; and four, the outcome of the midterm congressional elections in the United States. As far as economics, growing inflation in the US and Europe, a recession in the United States is going to impact how the US is able to evolve programs and initiatives in Central and Eastern Europe to counter the Chinese. Moving forward, it's essential in order for the US to maintain the level of influence that is needed to deter Chinese hegemonic ambitions, is to begin shifting away from government-funded programs to programs that are instead funded through private enterprise. An example is efforts to counter the Belt and Road Initiative throughout the region. In order for the United States and Europe to be able to fund platforms for infrastructure development, energy infrastructure development, et cetera, it's going to require a vast amount of funding. It's going to then thus require governments to rethink how this funding is acquired, since the US is already running a recession and cannot continue printing money, funding the war effort in Ukraine, as well as helping Taiwan defend itself. So therefore, it's going to require private enterprise to begin investing in these projects. And one example that I had suggested in the paper was perhaps utilizing public pension funds as a means of funding such initiatives. I found that just 1% of the United Kingdom's pension fund invested into infrastructure development would match nearly 50% of the Belt and Road Initiative's annual budget. Another item to consider is the upcoming midterm elections. The Republicans are almost certain to retake both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and they're going to have a considerable amount of influence on how the US government moves forward, not only for countering China, but also for funding initiatives in Central and Eastern Europe to help break away, to help the region break away from Chinese influence. First and foremost would be energy policy. The energy policy is likely going to change dramatically under Republican leadership. Right now, the Biden administration is focusing heavily on green energy agenda, environmentally conscious energy policies, but those do not necessarily help regional governments meet their short-term energy needs. So I would assume there's going to be a substantial pivot away from green policies toward a more fossil fuel driven energy policy. There'll likely be further infrastructure development for liquefied natural gas exports and regasification in the region, and probably less US government investment in clean energy initiatives such as solar panels or wind technologies. A more pragmatic US energy policy would certainly engage the private sector to finance these energy infrastructure needs. And it would also limit Russia and China from attempting to drive a wedge between Washington and Central and Eastern Europe, since the two would share energy ties, and then the US would then be able to possibly sanction on existing Chinese-Russian energy initiatives, such as the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which is paid for in the payments are made from China to Russia in euros. So if the US was able to reestablish increased liquefied natural gas exports to the region, perhaps there would be less opposition from France and Germany to sanction the pipeline and prevent China from paying for the energy exports in euros. It would also, most importantly, allow the United States to begin flooding the region with a substantial amount of less expensive liquefied natural gas. This would allow regional governments to dedicate less funding toward energy needs and perhaps increase defense expenditures, thus increasing a deterrent to not only Russian aggression in the future, but Chinese aggression as well. Very briefly, I just wanted to go into some of the key ways that Beijing has so far invested in Central and Eastern Europe. It's primarily been done through PRC investment in the region, development finance, technological influence, and soft power initiatives. An example of Beijing investing in key strategic sectors is one of an example is Ukraine. Previously, the Chinese had acquired during the breakup of the Soviet Union, had acquired military technology from a battleship, which was then reconfigured into developing the first Chinese aircraft carrier. Since then, China has had an unquenchable thirst for military technology for the region and targeted Ukraine's Motor Sich. Of course, the Trump administration had jumped in right away to prevent this from happening, and the Biden administration had also taken the necessary steps as well. Moving forward, one of the broader policy recommendations that I introduced in my paper was for countries to adopt investment controls, investment screening mechanisms. So far, I believe 18 out of the European Union countries have already adopted investment screening mechanisms similar to the United States Committee on Foreign Investment in the US, which is the main US investment screening platform. But it's critical for Ukraine, as well as Bulgaria and Estonia, which are two of the only, as far as I know, the two remaining European Union countries from CEE, which have not thus far adopted screening mechanisms in line with US recommendations. Another initiative that Beijing has undertaken over the years, of course, is the Belt and Road Initiative. This has led to transparency issues on competitive pricing, cost overruns, environmental concerns, and wage discrepancies. And as I mentioned earlier, it's critical for the US and European governments to encourage private enterprise and perhaps encourage investment from public pension funds to fund infrastructure development, energy infrastructure development through the 3Cs initiative and the 3Cs initiative investment funds. A third is, of course, technological influence. This was prevalent during Huawei's efforts to develop 5G networks throughout Europe. The US believed at the time that Huawei was used to undermine foreign competition, steal trade secrets, and steal intellectual property. And the final platform that was used with great success, in my opinion, was soft power diplomacy, such as COVID vaccine diplomacy in the Balkans during the pandemic. The US had been reluctant to export COVID vaccines until the majority of US citizens were vaccinated, and the Chinese took advantage of this poorly thought out policy and flooded the region with their own vaccines, which were their efficacy is questionable to say the least. but it allowed, for example, Serbia to reconsider its relationship with Washington during the Trump administration. They had previously opened up a office for the U.S. Development and Finance Corporation, which was the arm, which is similar to the China's Belt and Road Initiative as far as a funding mechanism. So the Biden administration closed down the DFC office in Serbia, thus cutting off U.S. development finance, and at the same time allowed China to enter the region with inexpensive or even at times free vaccines and other masks and other needed medical equipment to push out US influence from the region. Real quickly, as I wrap up my remarks, I have already covered some of the broader policy recommendations as far as pragmatic energy policies, private sector for investment, working through the 3Cs initiative investment funds, developing investment screening mechanisms for Bulgaria and Estonia. I also would suggest that Central and Eastern Europe consider outbound investment screening mechanisms. This would prevent China also from acquiring key technologies, and also would limit the amount of outbound Western financial flows, which helps fund, which helps grow China's economy and helps fund their soft power diplomatic efforts. Two other more broader policies that I would suggest are reshoring supply chains as far as rare earths. That would also cut down on Central and Eastern Europe's dependency on China for these rare earth materials, which are used in semiconductors and all other electronic devices that are needed on a day-to-day basis. This would, of course, involve cutting down regulations and loosening environmental policies for allowing not only the mining, but the processing of these rare earths. And then finally, it's important for the region just to come back to what I would call conservative economics 101. Lower corporate taxes as a region. This will allow the region to attract more foreign direct investment besides China. Reduce personal income taxes. This will boost consumer confidence, help grow the economy, help develop, in turn, more demand for products, and hopefully increase production of products at home instead of relying on the import of such products, goods, cheap manufactured goods from China. And then finally, taming inflation, putting together anti-inflationary economic policies, which will allow for economic growth and for the aforementioned lowering of corporate and personal income taxes, which in my opinion will help cut the dependency on China. And that's the conclusion of my remarks, and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Darren, for your first introduction. And for the sake of time, if I may just leave all the possible questions and discussions among the speakers till the last part of our event. So because a number of questions arise here, actually, but let me just dwell a bit on what you've said and try to bring more intrigue about the Chinese economic presence in the region. In Ukraine, we have folk saying, which could be translated into English as the dragon is not as big as it is being drawn by someone. So if we would consider real figures of Chinese economic presence in Europe, and especially in Central and Eastern Europe region, and compare them between the among the instruments they're using actually for this economic presence. So you will see that actual, for at least foreign direct investments, are on quite minor scale compared to those of the US and some countries in the Western Europe. So let me just then giving a bit of introduction into the region of Central and Eastern Europe as a whole, give you a couple of figures and just to give you some arguments why I'm saying that this image of a big dragon diplomacy and Chinese presence in Europe it is a bit exaggerated than it is in real figures. So I'd like to share with you some slides. Do everyone see the slides? Yeah. So Darren, you've talking about the actual Belt and Road Initiative and as a major economic tool that China tries to extend its presence in over the globe. And let me just start with this first slide, saying, giving you some understanding of the different breakdown among the different regions in the globe where China invested or introduced the economic mechanism under this Belt and Road Initiative. And not to overburden you with the figures, but if you see these charts, the light yellow one is about the region of Europe and Chinese economic efforts given to this particular region. Compared to the different parts of the globe, you will see that especially in the last years, 2020, 2021 and 22, you'll see that this share is quite minor compared to some other regions like Africa or Asian countries. So and also we've been hearing that China's Minister for Economy just claimed that they're going to decrease the amount of funds allocated for Belt and Road Initiative in the coming year. So we compared even to the previous year, the figures are a bit lower. So we probably won't be expecting, at least in Europe as a region, of China to pour in a lot of money on the Belt and Road Initiative. And also, as recent reports are indicating, which is quite striking actually, that in 2022, China hasn't invested any money on the Belt and Road Initiative in Russia. So this, to a certain extent, proves our hypothesis that we used, why China might be not very happy about the Russian war in Ukraine, because China have developed major routes how to get from Asia to Europe through Russia and Belarus, more than it done through Ukraine. And because of sanctions, because of all this international business boycotts to Russia, and a lot of international and multinational companies leaving Russia market, it just becoming very difficult for China to develop its strategic tools through Russia and through Belarus. And because of these figures that we see for Belt and Road Initiative for this year, where there are zero investments into Russia. So it just proved that this is not very comfortable moment probably for Russia, for China to see how it could reach Europe through Russia and Belarus, and it has to develop different routes how to get there. And before we will be mentioning some figures, me or my colleagues, experts, let me also give you some hints about What's difficult about these different measures and figures of Chinese economic presence in Europe? So a lot of different scholars and academics encountered with similar problems, saying that it's it causes them a big headache how to get and verify figures of China's economic presence in Europe. And the main problems that you've discovered while trying to collect and select and assess the data is about lack of reliable data sources, because some of the contracts or even protocol of intentions that are being concluded by Chinese companies with some governments, they have confidential clause in it, and quite a big amount of them are not open to public, so we can't access actually the real figures and the real terms of these contracts, investment contracts or other contracts that Chinese companies or government even concludes with the different countries. So data discrepancy, this is, I will show you in next slide, which is very striking, given big difference in data collected of Chinese economic presence in these countries by the countries themselves or by the Chinese outlets, data outlets. An inflated picture. This is something. This is a phenomenon which is very wide as far as Chinese data are concerned, because some of them include investment plans which were previously proposed but haven't been implemented by China. But the governments of different European countries tend to use these figures when they're mentioning about Chinese investments in these countries. For instance, for Ukraine, the figure are quite striking. If we collect all these pre-planned and promised contracts or big investment projects the Chinese companies and government suggested and offered for Ukraine since 2011, we might come up with the figure of around $25 billion promised. Out of this figure, only in between 100 million and 300 million of real money were invested from China into Ukraine. So this gives you the understanding how difficult it is to assess all this kind of data. And therefore, when we are talking about Chinese economic presence in Europe or in other parts of the world, we have to distinguish between infrastructure project financed by Chinese loans, then actually Chinese FDIs, and investments which are made by host country and partially financed by loan, or some investment projects with Chinese contractors. So different agencies tend to use either all these data collectively or just a particular element. Therefore, we have a very difficult task to identify the real amounts of money or Chinese investments in the region. And when we can assess this, we see that real money acquired at a very low or moderate figure, so which actually doesn't create a huge problem of Chinese winning over European countries or winning over Europe as a region in money terms.
Could I just jump in?
As I promised, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to jump in real quick. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think it is important, though, for a distinction to note that the influence of Chinese investment in the region is not necessarily dependent on the dollar figures. As I noted in the paper, China was Ukraine's top trade partner in the first half of 2021. I don't have the figures for the second half of 2021, but by creating a codependency of the two economies, Ukraine relying on Chinese exports, China is then able to target key strategic sectors and not necessarily with FDI, and not necessarily focus on flooding the market with a large amount of FDI. I think a key distinction is it doesn't necessarily matter what the level of FDI is coming from China. it's more important what sectors they're seeking to target, whether it's national security sectors such as motor sich or agricultural sectors. And this is done through the economic codependency through large amount of cross-border trade. That's my opinion, at least.
Yeah, thank you, Darren, for this comment. I'll be leaving all the comments on Ukraine to the Ukrainian bloc, but just reflecting to what you've said, trade is a bit different element in our research and assessment. Yes, from this point, you're correct. China is the major trading partner for Ukraine for at least recent 5 years. So it's just possessing permanent place #1 in terms of volumes of trade. But this is also quite a disadvantage factor for Ukraine, because if you compare the structure of export from Ukraine to China and the export of China to Ukraine, so it's not in Ukraine favors, because Ukraine exports mostly raw materials, and China tends to get into the sectors of with high added value, and just supplies Ukraine with more technically sophisticated or processed stuff. And with regard to the particular strategic sectors, this is something which deserves at least a couple of minutes for my reflection, but it would be more organic to be in the Ukrainian bloc. Let me just finish with this a bit probably boring but very important understanding of why it's so difficult to assess the real Chinese impact in economic terms, at least in Europe. So on this chart, you see that the figures provided by different agencies with regard to one and the same country are completely different and striking. So some of the governmental data, which you see in red color, tend to present these obviously inflamed figures, as I mentioned, of the promised and not implemented projects. Whereas FDI stock, as we see in light blue color, in striking dynamics, it's very low. So another one, this is again, to show you the differences between the value of infrastructure project, official FDIs, and actual flow of Chinese capital to different countries in Central and Eastern Europe. And you will see that the probably less transparent infrastructure projects, because it could be either, as I say to you, calculated in terms of Chinese subcontractors get into these infrastructure projects, or projects which are being partially co-financed by Chinese loans, or some other projects where China participate in certain extent. But with concrete money, concrete inflow of finance of Chinese capital into different European countries, you see that these charts are quite low compared to this very vague definition of infrastructure project. And just to finish with this one, this is very interesting one. You've said when you talked about the necessity to encourage more of foreign direct investments from US coming into Europe. So on this chart, you see quite clearly that the real FDIs from China is red in the countries in Central and Eastern Europe, and the blue, which is the striking highest volumes, comes as FDIs from Germany, and the green comes as FDIs from US. So you can also compare here that China actually has no real money invested into the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, as far as this comparison with some other, say, fixed figures are concerned. So let me then just give the floor to the view from the Baltics, probably, because Lithuania is, as Marius mentioned in his research and highlighted in pre-presentation, is a a very interesting example because it has been the first country to revolt the inefficiency of 16+1 format or 17+1 format, and it was the first one to officially quit the format. But as what we know so far, it's that Czech Republic also raised this issue and is also considering at the moment the possibility of leaving this format of economic cooperation with China, saying that actual investments from China in the country had been at dissatisfactory level. So they see no use of sticking to this format. And they're also considering this sort of leaving the format. So my questions to Maurice and might be my request for you to highlight two basic elements. So why actually it had been caused, the decision to leave the CE for plus China, 16+1 China format. And then also what were the implications for that, how China reacted to this and retaliated in a sense, and what sort of countermeasures were used by the Lithuanian government to that. Thank you. Marius, floor is yours. Marius, you need to switch on the microphone. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm very sorry. So thank you, Yulia, and I would like to thank the organizers for this very important and I would say a very timely event, because I'm really convinced that especially at the time of the war against Ukraine, which Russia started some 6 months ago, it's very important to look at China in this context. And Lithuanian example is very good to present what as the question was, what caused that and what should we do with that? So I will start from the first question, what caused Lithuanian position on China, because it was not just leaving 17+1, it was not just opening a Taiwanese representative office in the name of Taiwanese instead of Taipei. It was a full-scale review of Lithuanian policy towards China. And not only towards China, but towards well, I will let you know on that later. So the reason of that was very simple. And when Lithuania is now being considered as an icebreaker in this sense, not many people, not even experts, know that before that, I mean, just 2 years ago, Lithuania could have been called one of the most pro-China countries in at least in the region, because we had 2 consecutive governments before the current one, which tried to make relations with China into something really specific. I mean, they made all efforts possible to get Chinese investment and to increase our export to China, all kind of economical cooperation working. They did everything they just can to do. Despite of that, they failed. They failed completely. Before the decision to take this review of China policy, our export to China was at the level of 300 million euros, which is, for you to understand this, on the 22nd place of Lithuanian export list, behind even Kazakhstan. So our export to China was almost non-existent. It's for Lithuania, it's too small. Investment of China in Lithuania was at the level of some 20 million. I just want to stress that 20 million. This is direct investment of China in Lithuania. And what was the reason for all that? The reason was very simple, because China uses economical cooperation, and it's not only the case of Lithuania, it's all over the world, for political reasons. What they wanted to get, it was control or to take over Lithuanian infrastructure. First of all, Klaipėda port, and then, of course, all the other infrastructure. And when they got the answer from Lithuanian government that because of considerations of the national security, it is not possible. And there I should mention, which was already mentioned by our colleague from United States, it's an investment screening process. Lithuania was, I think, the first country in Europe which introduced such a screening. So when they got the answer from the government that China will not be allowed to take over the port, I mean, I can say that all the economical cooperation just stalled. And whatever our government did, including they publicly announced that they would like to make China into make Lithuania into China's gates into Europe. Nothing worked. So when the next government came to power, they just started the review of the whole process and all the policy towards China, just in order to diversify our economical relations. And that was the reason, one of the reasons, not the only one, because national security was at the same time considered as a very important aspect of this review. But that was one of the main reasons of this review of the Lithuanian-China policy. That's why, and that was the main reason why Lithuania left 17+1. That was the main reason of our new relations or developing of new relations with Taiwan. And so China just instigated, I can say even that, China just instigated Lithuanian policy towards itself. What happened afterwards, of course, we've got the unprecedented, because it's really unprecedented, China's trade war against Lithuania, because it was the first time when China introduced these secondary sanctions. I mean, we are used to Chinese sanctions on many countries and companies, and according to Australian researchers, in the last decade, China used economical coercion or economical sanctions against 150 countries and companies. So it's a very usual policy of China. But in addition to that, to this usual policy, they introduced, first of all, they introduced secondary sanctions. I mean, threatening all the other companies all around the world, both in Europe and in other countries, that if any part of the materials or anything is produced in Lithuania, this exporter will not be allowed to get into China. So that was really a big issue because as I said, it was unprecedented. But now when it's already from the beginning of the conflict, it's a year past, and from this introduction of these secondary sanctions, it's already some 8 months or something like that past. So or 9 months even. So now we can say that China completely failed, just completely, because of very simple economical figure. What China always wants to achieve is an economical impact that will not allow any government to pursue the same policy. So economical impact to Lithuania is almost zero, because it's true, and I just mentioned it in my research, that Lithuanian export to China dropped to 90%. It dropped 90%, and now it's, well, again, almost zero. But at the same time, our business reorientated, and we have figures from first 5 months of this year. January, May. And these figures show that Lithuanian overall export increased by 30%, 30. So it's not a decline, it's an increase by 30%. So we can say that China failed, and to put it into the context, because it's very important, because it's because of inflation, because of increase of prices, everything. It might seem that it might be that in the other case our export could increase even further. But to put into the context, we can take figures from Latvia and Estonia, which had no similar policy to Lithuanian one. And at the same time, Latvian export increased by 32%, and Estonian export increased even less, by 25%. So again, comparable. That also shows that no impact to Lithuanian economy was made by China. At the same time, we already, being an icebreaker, we already initiated a review of China policy in the European Union, because it's not only about WTO case, which was joined by other countries, including United States, Canada, Australia, Japan, only because of China coerce policy towards Lithuania. But it's also about this new mechanism to confront this coercive policy, which was introduced by European Commission. Again, it's just because of Lithuanian policy and China's reaction to Lithuanian policy. So I'm really convinced that Lithuanian story should be presented as a big victory and an example how we should act against China. Of course, said that, I should admit that one thing which China achieved in Lithuania, and it should be admitted, it's very important, and again, it's about lessons learned, that at the same time, having in mind that China economically achieved nothing, they achieved quite a lot politically. Now we have a situation when all, and I would like to stress that all parties in opposition in Lithuania support, or they are following I would say, openly pro-China policy. And that's because China, using its hybrid warfare, and that was used extensively in Lithuania, they achieved one very important thing. The support of Lithuanian government's policy towards China. The latest poll we have, it was last December, dropped to 18%. And that's very important because even a month before, I'm talking about the latest poll, so the other poll was taken a month before that, it was is still 25 as far as I remember. So it's in a month of a huge hybrid attack against Lithuania, they managed to get this support to drop by almost 20%. And now we have a problem with sustainability of this policy. If we talk about the policy of current government, it will not change. Nothing will change, but we don't know what happens when the next government comes. And it is a possibility that this government will not survive next elections. And when the next government comes, nobody knows what will be. So this is a very important lesson to be learned. And talking about some recommendations, I would stress, first of all, I would stress unity of all the allies, not only in European Union, because one of the reasons why China failed economically in Lithuania was exactly the quick reaction of European Union. I mean, these two important decisions, both WTO case and this new mechanism for countering economical coercion policy of China, they made China at least unofficially to stop their policy on these secondary sanctions. So no company left Lithuania. At the very beginning, they threatened, and it was not, when I say they, it was not just Chinese people or Chinese diplomacy or propaganda. It was also Lithuanian German economical chamber. And so they used even not only our own businesses, but they used businesses in Germany to make a pressure on Lithuania, but again, they failed. So these are very important lessons to be learned. And I think I will stop there, and afterwards I will be ready to answer the questions or to make some other comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marius. We'll be try to be as squeezed as possible within our presentations, because not so many times are going to be left for Q&A, but we'll try to do our best. But you left with very important remark about a sort of non-direct retaliation of China, and rather by using this invisible channels of making their political influence. And you were mentioning that the opposition parties are more and more presenting this pro-China stance. So this is actually one of the elements that a lot of experts identified who actually studied Chinese tools of penetration into European countries. By using this kind of government-to-government contacts, and also party-to-party contacts, and contacts on sub-governmental level and on people. So let me then switch to Anton and to ask to present the case for Western Balkans. How do you see whether China succeeded in their policy of getting into the region, or you also could give some of the assessments which could actually sound similar to what Marius said, or me, or you rather seeing this from Darren's view? Thank you, Anton.
Let me put the mic on. Is it okay now? You hear me? Okay. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Okay. Okay. I cannot hear you. Okay. Even though we had this research done a few months ago, even before the Russian aggression against Ukraine had started, I would say that following the situation, we could say that the main sort of agenda of the Chinese policy toward the Balkan region is basically unchanged. I want to thank you first of all for all the courage and I mean it's been shown in Ukraine and to Ukrainian people and your efforts, considering the situation you have in your country, that we did proceed with this project and finally managed to present our conclusions here. I would say that the Russian aggression against exposed a lot of things in the Balkans. Um, we sort of knew it was going to be that way, but then again, we are sort of, you know, it's hard to come to terms when you realize that in the Balkans you have a country like Serbia, which is openly supporting. I mean, not supporting, but not introducing sanctions, or basically have the general public supporting the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And it's been a mind-blowing and revealing experience, and to see how Russian and Chinese influence has been able to undermine Western influence in the region, even though the European Union is the major investor in the country, and basically the political elites of the countries that I've been researching, and I've used 3 countries, and so basically political elites of these of Serbia and Montenegro have used these intervention and aggression against Ukraine, and to gain more political support among the citizens, especially in Serbia, because it seems to be the case that in Serbia almost 90% of the population fully supports Russian intervention against Ukraine, thinking that Vladimir Putin is protecting Christian values against decadent West, and we see the failure of EU policies and Western policies in the region, because more than 20 years after the NATO intervention and support toward Kosovo, Serbia is openly and outwardly supporting Russia. As I said, in my research, I've chosen 3 countries from the region. Croatia not being a member of the Protocol 6, but obviously the country I'm coming from, and country that is EU and NATO member, but also in the Balkans, and at the same time a Mediterranean country and Central European country, at a really strategic crossroads between various regions of Europe. Then of course the second country that I looked into was of course Serbia, because as I said before, this is a country where you can see openly this Russian and of course Chinese influence and their growing strength. And of course, the case of Montenegro, which is a country that could be, fall victim of the policies toward China, allowing too much Chinese capital pouring into the country. I did not look into Kosovo nor Albania, because, I estimated that the Chinese influence was not relevant in this country, similar to the case of Montenegro. There is some, attempts to do things in Bosnia Herzegovina, especially in the part of Republic of Srpska, which is even more openly than Serbia supporting, Russian aggression against Ukraine. But then again, I thought that this influence was not relevant. And in the case of Croatia, I wanted to sort of showcase how the Chinese are trying to get into the a soft underbelly of Europe through a newcomer to the European Union like Croatia. So just to come more into detail to my conclusion, the EU is shaping its policy toward China on the European and global level, and the EU started to change its approach to China even a year before the eruption of the COVID-19 pandemic. In March 2019, the EU has, in its global strategy, identified China as a trade partner, but at the same time a strategic rival. This was an indication that the EU was becoming aware that the Chinese influence was growing globally, and with its stronger presence in Europe through the platforms including the Belt and Road Initiative and 60+1 format. Then the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic more than 2 years ago served as a catalyst to make more control of the Chinese growth in Europe through export investment and position of European companies. So basically, what I look into this paper in my research is that even before the war in Ukraine, the Chinese, I think it was mentioned by Darren before, that the Chinese managed to use the pandemic to portray themselves as the major, protector of Serbia. They were the first ones to export personal protection equipment, PPE, to Serbia, and Serbia was full of signs. Thank you, brother Shi. So basically, what they did, the Chinese did. They exported the first tranche, or it was a donation, and then they were making a lot of money exporting facial masks and other protection equipment to Serbia. And the European Union was slow to react, and this was another round, another battle where the Chinese proved to be more successful and getting a hold of the country. So in my research, I came to conclude that no European Union nor the American strategy have concrete tools to curb the Chinese growing influence in the Balkans. During the Trump administration in 2020, the US showed interest to resolve the dispute between Kosovo and Serbia, while the Biden administration strives to take control of the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The EU seems to be reluctant to get involved in the region to indicate a clear path forward for accession of the Western Balkan countries. So this is really an important, indication that we have to look into. Maybe you're aware that in the meantime, after we've done the first part of the paper in February, in the meantime, the negotiating process was open with the two countries, Albania and North Macedonia. At the same time, 3 weeks before that, in late June, the EU granted the candidate status to both Ukraine and Moldova. What I think that we'll have this scenario where the EU is trying to manifest that something is going on, because it's been going on for too long. But for Ukraine and for countries in the Western Balkans, even including Serbia, Montenegro, and we have to know that Montenegro opened all of its negotiating chapters. I don't see, and all analysts, are in unison in concluding that these countries will not join the European Union anytime soon. And this is basically also in favor of the political elite of Serbia and Montenegro. They're not sort of, frankly said, honest allies of the West. They sort of love the situation where they can, struck direct deals with Russian or Chinese companies. And this is something that I've been looking into. So basically, the Chinese are investing none, or have invested, zero or little, funds to Serbia. Basically, what they're doing, they're making big deals, infrastructure projects, and they have direct bargaining with the Serbian government. And this opens the door for large, corruption scandals. And I came to realize in my research that they managed to open or create a new model of cooperation between the government and China. So basically, you have the Serbian President Vučić calling directly President Xi, and they make a deal that makes the Chinese happy. They give big loans to the Serbian government, which you just mentioned. China wrote a bridge corporation that I indicated in my paper. They granted the 3 billion loan to the 3 billion euros loan to the government of Serbia for the reconstruction of water supply and sewage network in some 10 or more municipalities in Serbia. In return, the Serbia expects local companies to be subcontracted. And this is a scheme that favors, national level of power in Serbia and local levels, local cronies of the president in Serbia. So everyone's happy, and China is more than willing to, give loans to Serbia. In the case of Montenegro, with this loan, only for the Bar Boljare motorway, the loan was over 1 billion euros. It's still around 900 million euros that the Montenegrins have to pay off. Due to the size relative, Montenegro is a small country of just around 600,000 people. They have been able to sort of, strangle Montenegro. And now Montenegro is in a perilous position. The EU, if you ask me, has done a bad thing, declining, bailout process to Montenegro. The government is unstable, and the political figure that has been dominating the political scene for the past 30 years, even not all communist, Mr. Milo Đukanović, who was trying to portray himself as, harbinger of freedom, after the, prior to the independence referendum in 2006. And, the leader of EU integration, is basically done, more or less the same thing as in Serbia, claiming, nominally to be a friend of the West and trying to get, officially to get the country into, the membership of the EU, but at the same time allowing both Russian and Chinese capital to roam around the country. And both countries, of course, it's not a subject here, but maybe we should look into that. Due to the parallel situation that we have in Eastern Europe, the really toxic influence of Russian companies in both countries, taking over companies in really strange circumstances. So in my paper, I came to realize that Serbia is making a specific model which is favoring China and which is favoring Serbian political elite, both on the national and on the local level. But this in turn is, and on the long run, is going to harm the Serbian population. The same case is in Serbia. As I mentioned, the president of the country made certain promises to the Western allies, but now still, is trying to influence the political life. There is a big chaos in the country. There are a lot of parties, and over 50% of the population, some part of Montenegrins, and the whole of the Serbian population, that is comprising more of 30% of the Montenegrin population, are in support of Putin and his actions in Ukraine. And here we have, in a way, similar population. a situation as in the three Baltic states where they have big Russian minorities. Negro, where the whole of Serbian minority is openly supporting Russian intervention. And this is quite important because in my research, I came to realize that the Chinese and Russian influence are growing together, and the two seem to be supporting each other. And I indicated the case of iron smelter or iron plant in Smederevo on the Danube in Serbia, where I had basically it's not a greenfield investment, it's a brownfield investment. So a Chinese company taking over one of the biggest state-owned companies in the country and the biggest producer of iron and steel in Serbia, where the Chinese have managed to get favorable prices of Russian gas. To run the whole facility. So what I saw in the case of Serbia and Montenegro, that the two sides, China and Russia, they work hand in hand. They support each other. Their political agenda is similar. Uh, what they want to do is they want to undermine European values. They want to convince the Serbian and Montenegrin populations that these countries belong to the Euro-Asian integration, not to the European integration and to Western values. And they have been quite successful in attracting especially Serbian political elite. The Montenegrins seem to be more divided, but Serbian political elite, not just the ruling party or the president, but even the opposition is openly pro-Russian. And as I mentioned before, during the COVID crisis, they were portraying, the might of China, who was there to help, and the futile attempts of the European Union to face the Chinese strength and swiftness in curbing the COVID pandemic. This is a really troublesome situation for all of the European Union, because, as I said before, we have a situation where you have a country which is the only country in Europe not introducing sanctions toward Russia. They will continue to bring in the Chinese capital. What they've done, they introduced sanctions in Serbia to Belarus, and this sparked an to the condemnation that came from Moscow. So I would say that use the would work, and I would conclude that there is no chance that anytime soon Serbia will side with the West against Russia. Croatian case, on the other hand, is really different to the case of Serbia and Montenegro. Here, the political elite is not um, closely linked to the Chinese political elite. First of all, and formally, Croatia is a member of the EU and NATO. However, the Russians have been quite able, not a lot of people are aware of this fact, to take over some major industries in Croatia and to dominate the energy sector. So for the time being, I came to this conclusion in my research, and this is what's been unfolding ever since the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Um, Croatia is trying to decouple, from Russia, but this is going to take some time. Of course, politically, Croatia is fully supporting the Ukraine, but then again, they have the control of the biggest power, private-owned energy company. And now what Croatia is trying to use as a tool, and it's also manifests the benefits of the integration, is the LNG terminal on Kirk Island, which has been financed by the European money. So Croatia is in a way in a much more favorable position because it's not a landlocked country like Serbia. It has access to EU funding, and even though with this strong Russian influence and really insignificant or rather small Chinese influence in the country, Croatia is able to give full support to the West, to the American ambitions to curb China's influence in the region and to stand with Western allies against Russia and to support Ukraine. In my paper, I also indicated three major projects in Croatia that have been that were targets of Chinese intentions. First of all, it was the Pelješac Bridge, which was opened like 10 days ago. It was the biggest infrastructure project funded by the European Union in Croatia. What we saw 5 years ago when Croatia made the tendering process was a big protest from Brussels when Croatia decided to grant the money to a Chinese company, one of the best in the world for the construction of bridges, but still it was almost 400 million of European money granted to the notorious CRBC company, which is also present in Montenegro for the construction of Bar-Boljare motorway, and that the Chinese are using this company to sort of strangle and to put in the unfavorable and indebted position, like the no in the case of Montenegro, the similar case we saw now with the unfolding the situation in some Asian countries, first of all Sri Lanka. The same company is also largely present in Serbia. This is also an interesting fact that CRBC was the major company that the Chinese are using in all of these three countries. To wrap up, Croatia came to a conclusion that this was the first big and the last big project that was given to the Chinese company. Now, after the opening of this bridge 10 days ago, we have a lot of criticism from Germany, the major player in the EU, that the conditions on the construction side were inhumane, etc. Then we have two major projects: the railway project, which will connect the city of Rijeka, and the Rijeka cargo terminal, where basically Croatia intervened politically to block China and their companies. It's unofficial, it's a rumor, but it's been said in Croatia that the Croatian government has been under pressure from Western allies not to allow the Chinese companies to actually take control of the Rijeka port. The case we saw in Piraeus in Greece, and the major road which will connect this port which could import Russian product, Chinese products to Central European countries like Austria, Germany, and Hungary. So what we see is a process. We've seen that this process started in Croatia 2 years ago with the COVID. Their COVID was the milestone, not Russian intervention. So we saw that even before the Russian intervention in Ukraine, the COVID-19 pandemic was the milestone where Croatia, unofficially accepted or adopted the political decision to stop Chinese not investments. We had only one investment in one wind farm. This is the only investment. It also attracted a lot of corruption problems and scandals because it involved a company from the military intelligence complex of China, Norinco. So that was the only investment. Situation in Croatia is that we have abundant EU funding at this moment. It's over 30 billion euros that are exposed to Croatia until 2030, and the Chinese want to take a major chunk of this pie. So we have two distinct situations. On the one hand, we have Croatia. On the other side, we have Serbia. In Montenegro, the country is trying to struggle against the Chinese influence and get closer to European integration. On the other side, Serbia is a country where they're not even trying to hide their ambitions to strengthen their links with the Chinese, to allow them to work even more, and with the country that is openly supporting on a political level and on the sort of say population level is supporting, especially among ordinary citizens. Serbia is supporting Russian aggression against Ukraine. So basically, that's me. I'm open for your intervention and questions.
Thank you very much, Anton. Thank you all the audience for your patience to listen through, and still promise you that if you have patience for another 15-20 minutes just for us to give me my final remarks on Ukrainian case, and then probably at least for 5-7 minutes to conclude and to have some general remarks from our speakers. Those who want to ask a question, you can write in general chat, and then we can read your questions aloud, and then let the speakers answer your question. But let me just give me my compulsory part of presenting the Ukrainian case briefly. I'll try to be very brief and probably not promising to be very entertaining because of the subjects, and what the times like our country is living through at the moment. But at least I'll try to encourage you by energy of my voice, speaking louder or lower at some point, for you just to feel a bit not so probably bored with what I'm going to say. So in my presentation, I just put the question and in the announcement to the event you've seen this, is Ukraine a special case in all this setting and all this agenda? Yeah, it's definitely a special case for a number of reasons, and it used to have been a special case for China even before the war, but right now it makes it even more special. And following with the logic that Anton suggested, that in Serbia it seems like Russia and China are sort of making more of their presence, and relations are getting better in between these three countries. So getting from this logic, we should expect that the presence of Russia is almost getting down to zero in Ukraine. So there should be some sort of less presence or less political relations with China and with Russia and China in Ukraine. And this is actually very interesting dimension, because following what Darren said about investments in particular sensitive areas, yes, definitely there had been a lot of scandals around the motor siege, and different positions reflecting whether it was a deliberate attempt of Chinese to steal Ukrainian military technologies, or one of the actually suggestions why Ukrainian government decided to stop this investment activity of Chinese companies into motor siege, and even to nationalize the enterprise, was not just because of Russia, but because they had the security service of Ukraine had some sufficient reliable data that these were just nominal investors into the motor siege, but the original beneficiaries were our northern neighbors. Therefore, this case for motor siege failed actually in terms of Chinese investment in Ukraine, and definitely it had created a sort of headache in our economic relations, because the issue is still not settled to the end. And the last information we've got that Chinese filed a suit in International Arbitral Court for suing for 4.5 billion of dollars on Ukrainian authorities. But because of this case, Ukrainian authorities had to react to that, and so they gave a statement last year, which actually was quite illustrative and very straightforward in terms of understanding how Ukraine's cooperation with China is. And this is just quoting the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. He said that we shall build the relations with China as part of Western civilization. All sensitive issues of investments into security and the military technologies of Ukraine will be a priority in cooperation with the countries of pro-Western orientation. With China, we will develop a pragmatic relations of economic cooperation. This was the statement in November last year. And also another document which is worth to quote here is that our strategy on foreign activity that was adopted also last year stated that one of the priorities that Ukraine attaches to its relations with Asian countries, China included, is to get more wider support in issues on countering Russian aggression in Ukraine and to restoring territorial integrity of Ukraine in its internationally recognized borders. Obviously, all of you know China's ambiguous position with regard to explicit Russian invasion into Ukraine since February this year. And given this priority that our president and our political elites given to attached to the cooperation with China even the year before, and having no actually definite response with regard to Russian aggression and invasion into Ukraine, I think that this gives you the answer what we have to expect from the relations between Ukraine and China in all spheres. In all spheres of the life. And one of the recent developments in political field was that Ukrainian side pretended to take with understanding the Chinese, say, indefinite approach to the Russian, to condemning Russian aggression and invasion in Ukraine. And at some point in May, our president said that we understand the Chinese position, and at least we're grateful they're not explicitly supporting Russia. But then also there is another idea of getting China on board as co-mediator with the other international influential partners in order to pursue Russia to change its policy in the region and to withdraw its troops from Ukraine. However, it's rather wishful thinking because it's very difficult to expect from China to do this kind of efforts of putting pressure on Russia, because starting from the whole history of China's co-mediation in any international conflicts, one could see that they pretend to play rather a role of dialogue facilitator than an active broker. And therefore, these hopes of Ukrainian side or of some Western partner side hasn't materialized yet, and I think that it gets even less chances to do it. One of the illustrative proof for that is that Chinese leader Xi Jinping hasn't had any phone talks with our president since the Russian invasion in February this year, despite Ukrainian side asked for this kind of contacts. So obviously, we can assess the economic cooperation of China and Ukraine before the war, and some of the elements of it I've already covered in my interactions and with the other colleagues in discussions. So basically, we have high dependency on trade with China. Definitely, it's the biggest trade partner at the moment, and the overall trade turnover amounts for $15 billion between the two countries. But when we talk about this investment cooperation or Chinese presence in Ukraine's infrastructure contracts or any other kind of contracts which supposed to have investment component in it. So the declared intentions amount for, as I said, $25 billion. Out of this, less than 50% had been at least extended into a contractual phase. And out of these, 40% of those who successfully went to the second stage, also the percentage of these efficient or successful contracts, probably less than 20%. And that gives you an understanding that in terms of investment cooperation or Chinese extended investment presence in Ukraine, it's very low. In terms of direct investments of China in Ukraine, FDIs from China amounts for less than 1% in total amount of FDIs to Ukraine, especially given the fact that we've got annexation of Crimea in 2014, where Chinese hoped for to get some of infrastructural projects with Ukraine to realize their Belt and Road Initiative. So obviously these projects failed to get implemented because of the annexation. Then we had some more projects which also didn't come out, but for a number of reasons. Some of them are subjective, because China didn't see any interest of developing this kind of infrastructure projects in Ukraine if Ukraine is not part of this Belt and Road Initiative and route from Asia to Europe, because part of the route should be going through the common custom area established by Russia and some of the former partners from the Soviet Union. And Ukraine was not the member of this kind of customs union, so a lot of administrative procedures, custom procedures are different, and Chinese didn't want to get into this kind of difficulties in non-unified norms of transportation. Therefore, they try to develop this most of these projects through Russia and Belarus, and Ukraine were not actually part of this big part of this Belt and Road Initiative. Also, Ukraine didn't become the member of this 17+1 format, and probably less likely to become one. So this is what we can say about the cooperation with China in the period pre-war period. After-war period, obviously, there are no vivid economic activity, at least in terms of any active investments into Ukraine, hadn't been made by China. Because all this ongoing war and destructions and missiles attacks from Russia, they destroyed not just Ukrainian infrastructure, but some of the Chinese investments made by KOVCO in Mariupol had been also damaged by Russian missiles. So obviously, China tends to have this wait-and-see approach, and probably having some hopes of getting more investments into Ukraine at some point in the future, but definitely not for immediate time. And also need to mention, just to wrap up, that China, at least as far as the records we have stopped all official bilateral public contacts with Russian authorities and with Ukrainian authorities since May. So China pretends to have this role of independent non-participant, because in most cases Chinese authorities want to emphasize that they have no relation to the conflict. Therefore, I think that for the time being, Ukraine a bit skip off the Chinese ambitious agenda to win over Europe, and definitely Ukraine still is a special case for China. I hope for some very limited period, because it just depends on how long the war will be in Ukraine. And we wish the war to finish soon with the victory of Ukraine. So I might stop here, and so there are a couple of questions going to Anton. So probably Anton, if you have access to the general chat, so you can just answer the question posed to you. Thank you.
If you can just read the questions.
Sorry, it's one question for you, and another questions to Darren. My question to you about Montenegro and situation in. You hear me? a situation with roads, building roads. You know this situation?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Do you think that this situation will be extrapolated in other countries? I mean, with these investments, and these investments will be like a big economical trap in the future.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the question. It is already a big trap. Um, we had a similar situation with the Russian trap. Trap in Podgorica aluminum smelter when the Russian investor Oleg Deripaska,
Deripaska.
yeah, he activated the back guarantee, and actually instead of investing, he made 100 million euros of activating the bid bond or back guarantee. In the case of Montenegro, it's quite different to the case of Serbia, because Serbia is a much bigger country and a much bigger economy, and it will be hard for the Chinese to strangle Serbia with a few loans they've been granted and taking over, and while they were taking over vital economy branches of economy or industries in Serbia. So it's really a $1 million question for the case in the case of Montenegro, how they will be able, or they won't be able to pay off the debt, because they paid off some 10%. Um, um, for the time being, the European Union is not willing to assist them. At the same time, their economy is struggling. One of the major branches of their economy was tourism. It was hit hard during the past 3 years. First because of COVID, and now during this war, because major chunk of tourists was coming from Russia, and now these are not coming from Montenegro. So this exposed how perilous it is when you open yourself totally or fully or to a large extent to countries like China and Russia. So for the time being, we're really going to see whether in China, whether Montenegro will default, or we'll have a case of Sri Lanka at the heart of Europe. They are not going to join the European Union anytime soon. And as I told you before, similar to the case of Serbia, but they're openly, pro-Russian. Um, in Montenegro, they're trying to play both cards. So we had the case of Milo Djukanovic, who's still the president, supporting e-integration, at the same time allowing Russians to buy a lot of properties around Montenegro, to take over major industries. There are also indications that there was a major deal going on between the Montenegrin political elite and the Chinese while they were striking the deal for this loan, 1 billion loan. They just managed to open the first section of the road, and it's basically serving no one, because this part of the motorway or the highway is in the middle of the mountains, and it's not connecting a major port or the capital Podgorica to any major city, either in Montenegro or connecting it to other routes in Europe. So the situation in Montenegro looks rather bleak, and we have the prime minister, who is not a strong person, pretty inexperienced, and that's Mr. Bazovic, and it looks quite perilous. We could even see the case of a country defaulting like we saw in Asia. So it's a really good question. On the other hand, Serbian economy is much stronger, but they could, on the other side, make a lot of trouble for the European Union, for the American missions in the region. In 2014, they've been sending volunteers to the Crimea, as we mentioned, for Crimea. Now they're not introducing sanctions toward Russia, and they're pretty assertive, even openly aggressive, supporting the secessionism secessionist tensions in Republic of Srpska, Milorad Dodik. They also made a deal between the Serbian Orthodox Church, Srpska Pravoslavna Crkva,
Yeah.
and the Prime Minister of Montenegro. They are trying to destabilize the whole of the region, and for that case, the role and the position of Serbia is much more important. Even you had the case of opposition leader or one of the politicians in the opposition stating that Kosovo should be denazified. Now the terminology that the Russians are using in Ukraine, and I'm fully aware that if I mean, luckily it's not the case, but had the Russian intervention been successful, that the first target would have been either Poland or the Balkans.
Okay, thanks for the answer.
And then, Yulia, did you want me to answer the questions that were posed? Okay.
Yes.
I'm gonna work backwards. I see you asked a question about Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. My opinion is it was very important for her to be there, regardless of what one thinks about her politics. However, the way it was done was disorganized and even a bit sloppy, that there was no coordination with the White House. Of course, in the US, there are co-equal branches of government, and there does not necessarily need to be permission from the White House, the executive branch, in order for the leader of the legislative branch to do such delegations. However, the fact that Joe Biden on 3 separate occasions declared he pivoted away from the decades-long US policy of strategic ambiguity to strategic clarity, stating that the US would in fact defend Taiwan if there was forcible reunification. That was a complete disruption of previous US policy over numerous administrations. So when Pelosi then plans to visit Taiwan, and you have Biden stating to reporters that the US military did not think it was a good idea for her to visit, it shows that there's a real lack of coordination between the 2 branches of government. And it also puts into question for not only Taiwan, but the other US and European partners throughout the Indo-Pacific, whether the US is actually capable of defending Taiwan if there was forcible reunification, particularly as the US is heavily focused on assisting Ukraine with arms to defend the Russian aggression. So long story short, it was very important for her to be there, but at the same time, this seemed to be a strictly political visit. There were no serious policy proposals that were introduced during her visit. There was no, Taiwan, the US is legally bound to provide defensive arms to Taiwan. And there have been increasing questions about the US ability to provide those arms as we are arming Ukraine in its defense of its territorial integrity against the Russian invasion. So there were no answers to any of Taiwan's very public questions about what arms are going to be provided to Taiwan, when, and in what quantity. So in that respect, the visit was a failure. Your second question was, we're seeing increasing aggression by China
with another countries. Yes, a second question about allies with another countries, maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, I last month for the Henry Jackson Society, I released a paper on how the US and United Kingdom can help secure the Taiwan Strait. And one of my suggestions was utilizing AUKUS, which is a trilateral defense pact between Australia, the United Kingdom, and US, to act as a counterbalance in the Indo-Pacific at this time, when the US is perhaps not capable of providing the defense necessary for the entire region, while also providing it heavily in Europe through NATO. So AUKUS, in my opinion, can serve as a platform, and perhaps even expand it to include Japan. It's been called a JAUKUS, Japan, Australia, US,
Maybe
United
South
Kingdom.
Korea. With South
Possibly.
Korea. Mhm.
Yeah, certainly. And not only provide a defensive counterbalance, but also as an investment mechanism. One of the examples I provided was China for years now has been blocking Taiwan's participation in the World Health Assembly.
Yeah.
The United States, Australia, and UK, I believe, contribute close to 40%, maybe even a bit more, to the World Health Assembly's total annual budget. Perhaps if they stepped away as a trilateral group and said, we are no longer going to provide the funding to this UN organization as long as Taiwan is not permitted to be a participant and as an observer, perhaps then the World Health Assembly would actually stand up for Taiwan's right for observer status. I also suggested AUKUS could be used as an export control mechanism to help not only Indo-Pacific countries, but possibly expand to Central and Eastern Europe, prevent the export of technologies that can be used for surveillance or be used to expand Russia's or China's military capabilities until Russia and China are willing to abide by the rules-based international order. So that's one platform that I would suggest. And then your other question, what mechanisms can be used to counter China? As I just mentioned, perhaps AUKUS being expanded to include some European countries as well. As I mentioned previously, the 3 Cs initiative needs to be reinvigorated to attract private investment in order to match any infrastructure development initiatives throughout the region. And then one other initiative that I did not mention earlier, which is critical, is the Partnership for Transatlantic Energy and Cooperation, PTEC, which was launched in 2018 to enhance energy security and resilience through essential transatlantic cooperation. That organization seems to be mostly dormant throughout 2022. The last ministerial meeting was last year in Poland, and I don't see any plans for a 2022 ministerial meeting, but reinvigorating that platform, getting additional cooperation through other European partners, Germany, France, United Kingdom, even perhaps some Indo-Pacific partners as well, to, as I mentioned, pivot away from almost an obsession with climate-driven energy policies and address more short-term energy policies that can only be addressed through fossil fuel development, processing, and infrastructure development.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so thank you very much, especially for those who stayed till the almost the end of our presentation. Yes, definitely the topic is, as has been shown, is extremely vast, and there are a number of different elements in it. So we barely covered it in 2 hours time, but the logic of this discussion was just to present these initial findings, have this discussion, and then to wrap up in the coherent research afterwards with common conclusions, with common policy recommendations, and some peculiarities just been mentioned by our speakers. So definitely, once the report is produced, it will be placed on the, it's going to happen in a month's time. So it will be placed on the website of the Renaissance Foundation, our Eastern Europe Security Institute, available to all the speakers to put on their websites of their institutions they represent. And so you can write to any of us just to get the copy of it if you're just interested in the findings. Thank you very much for your interest, first of all, and wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thanks.